All right, welcome to episode 4. Today we're going to start working on the independent rear suspension. Before we start, there's some things you got to do to get set up before you go ahead and start assembling everything. First thing I'm going to do is going to take on my control arms, and I'm going to go ahead and put the little grooves in the bottom of the bushings like I did on the front upper control arms and lower control arms. So just like we did before, we're just going to take the Dremel tool and just very lightly put a little groove lined up with the grease fitting openings on the side of the bushing. The big thing is it doesn't have to be that deep. I mean, just enough for your fingernail to catch it is all you need. That's all there is to it. All right, now we're going to take our spindle. We've already cut the ear off as is depicted in the book, and then smoothed it all down so that when you're working on it, you're not getting your hands cut on the sharp metal. The next thing we're going to do is we need to open up this hole right here to a 5/8. It actually goes through pretty easy, a little bit of WD-40 to loop things up. That's all there is to it. Okay, hooked in the rear hub to the rear spindle, and we're going to torque that down to 98 foot-pounds. All right, next thing we need to do is go ahead and open up the front mounts on the rear end to 5/8 of an inch, just like we did on the other piece. All right, I'm on to the other side now. I got to tell you, this definitely would have been easier with the second set of hands. On to putting in the rubber mounts that support the rear end. They tap in easily with a hammer as long as you haven't already put the middle bushing in. Once the rubber is all tapped in place, then just go ahead and slide the bushings in. Okay, moving on to the lower control arm. We simply take this, we screw it in here. This is reverse thread. You put the locking nut on. Reverse. Now, the thing I found, this does not easily screw into here. Apparently, these threads got pretty jacked up when they welded it. So what I had to do was I had to put a bunch of WD-40 on this, put it in the vise, and run it in about 4 times to get it to be even reasonably functional. I'd run it in, pull it back out, clean off all the threads, flush it out really good, put some more WD-40 on it, and run it in again. The way I had it hooked up was put into the vise here. A little something to protect this. And then when you're done, even when you're doing the final assembly, which is what I'm doing right now, you got to make sure you put the lock nut on first. And then I would put some white lithium or a little anti-seize in there. I'm using the white lithium grease. Now keep in mind, this is after doing this 4 times, slowly, back and forth like this. Take it apart, clean it out, take it apart, clean it out. So it took quite a bit to get just to here. All right, that's probably far enough. Then this first thread into here. And then once you get in there, go ahead and get your measurements in accordance with the book, snug it up, and set it aside for installation. Okay, onto the upper control arm. This is a lot easier. I found the threads in here were really good, but you're still going to want to put some lithium or anti-seize on these before you put them together. And this goes together pretty simple. Again, this is a reverse thread. You'll screw it in about halfway is what works out when you're getting your measurements right. Of course, I already put my lock nut on there. Okay, then we come around, lock nut on here. This is normal thread. All right, then you line it up, get the measurements according to the book, and snug up your jam nuts, and you're ready to bring it over for installation. All right, rear brake rotors for the wheel woods go together just like the front ones. I already showed you how to do that. Go ahead and line it up, flip it over, you put your screws in with a little bit of red Loctite, and then you tighten them down to 155 inch-pounds. Don't mess that up. Use a crisscross pattern. Once everything's snugged up, go ahead and install your safety wire and set it aside for installation. Okay, now it's time to mount the rear end itself. You're probably asking yourself, why am I showing you it already put together and assembled instead of showing you how I got it in there? Well, we got the new camera with the good sound and the clear picture. Unfortunately, if you don't turn it on, it does not record what you're looking at. Who knew? Anyway, it went in pretty simply. All we did was we took the pumpkin itself and we stood it up on a jack so that the front part here was pointed up in the air. Then we lowered it on my handy dandy lift here, which I got from Amazon for I think like $1,500. And brought the car down to the pumpkin and jacked it up just a little bit to get it in there, and then wrestled with it a little bit to get it in place. Everything lined up pretty well. It wasn't terribly difficult, but it does definitely help to have an extra set of hands. It's a little bit difficult to see here, but one of the problems I ran into is the casting of the rear end was off the back of the bushing by about the thickness of a credit card after I torqued it down to 100 foot-pounds. What that meant is there was stress on that casting the whole time. And I got to believe that eventually that would lead to cracking. My solution was to install a washer on the back side of the pumpkin to push the pumpkin forward and get that good firm contact in the front. And that would relieve the stress on that casting. The book actually does a really good job of explaining how the independent rear suspension goes together, so I'm not going to belabor it too much. You put the upper control arm in, as he's doing right here. Torque that down according to the book. Then you do the same thing down with the lower control arm. It all goes together pretty simple. We had to bend out some of the attachment points just a little bit so it would slip in there. But nothing too bad. We used a rubber mallet and just slapped it a couple times, and it allowed the pieces parts to slip in place. Putting in the axle wasn't difficult at all. You just line it up and you slide it into the rear end, and you're looking to get 2 clicks. It takes a little wiggling and jiggling to get everything lined up. But once you get it in there, you drive it home, and you'll get the first click, and then you'll watch he's going to hit it again. Boom, there's the second click. Now he'll pull after he checks it here. Next, we're going to hook the spindle to the upper control arm. Got your bushings already in place there. Just slide the bolt in place and torque that down.
So, an easier way to do this If you do not have a second set of hands, you can go ahead and mount to your upper control arm, throw in a bolt just to hold it in place. In rotating the hub, you can mount the axle in position, all with just one set of hands.
Yeah, the brakes go on just like they did in the front, so I won't waste a lot of time going over that with you. Just be sure you have them centered so the pads are equal spaced on each side of the rotor. I'm going to treat the shocks the same way. We showed you in video 2 how to put them together, and in video 3 how to mount them on the front, and they go together the same way on the back. On the top, make sure you have the 2 large spacers, and on the bottom, a big one and a small one. Okay, the last thing we're going to do is install the emergency brake. We're not going to wire it up or anything, we're just going to get it in place. Pretty simple. All of the structure here goes back towards the rear of the car. There's a little mount right here. Make sure you open up the brakes and just slip that in. There are these 2 bolts. They say to put red Loctite on it, but I've never worked on anything that I didn't have to take apart again, so I'm going to go with blue. Bolt in the front, bolt in the rear, screw them in. Tighten them down to 30 foot-pounds of torque, and that's all there is to it. Okay, I lied. The real last thing I did was I went around and I put slippage marks on all the bolts after I torqued them down. This is a good visual indicator of whether or not stuff's starting to back off as you're driving the car. A real important place to do it is right here on all the points that are adjustable. Reading in some of the forms, there has been a tendency for these to come loose, but if you have the slippage marks on there, it makes it real easy to do a quick visual and know if it's moved or not. These are not slippage marked because the car still needs to go and get the final alignment put on it, and once that's done, I'll make sure they're tightened down and we'll get some good slippage marks on there. Okay, thanks for watching. Really appreciate it. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Can I help you? Huh? I have to drill a hole in the front mount of the rear end. Can you get out of the way so I can do that? Come on. Everyone go. Go, go, go.